The dogs that we see in the pedigrees the most back in the 80s, I have to assume that those would be some of your favorite dogs, like, you know, Joe Testament and whatnot.
Uncle Bud, Johnny Walker Red. Because I wound up getting Johnny Walker Red back from Bert. I actually bought him back from Bert, and we won a match with him. So he was actually a 4-time winner. But it always bugged me that they always listed him as a 2-time winner. Johnny Walker Red was a 4-time winner.
No kidding.
Yep. Well, what happened was he's a 2-time winner of the night in Tijuana. That's the second time.
Right.
And then when I got him down to Caesar matched him. Caesar won a match with him. So now he's a champion. And then I get him back from Bert, and I won with him. So he's a 4-time winner.
Something else that came up that would have happened before he moved out here was me thinking about Phil Dibble and STP.
Okay. You want to go into that?
Yeah, mention that real quickly, so because that's a huge part of the Sorrells family.
Shorty the Preacher. Okay, when I first met Bert, I didn't know it at the time because I was a newcomer, but I didn't even understand what was going on. But Randy told me later that Bert's yard was a little flat. He was running a lot of game dogs and not a lot of talent. He was really looking for something to put into his blood because they were very game, very talented. I mean, very game, well-bred, good producers, but they weren't. He wasn't seeing a lot of really badass talent, bite-wise.
Mm-hmm.
He was losing his bite. Well, Phil Dibble and Randy Chavez were driving in. Well, they were both from Albuquerque, okay, and so they were driving in a neighborhood, and there was, you know, like the lawn and the typical neighborhood, the houses close together, and so they went by, and there was a dog with a rope leash on his collar, tied onto the bumper of a car, and there was a Mexican sitting out there washing his car. The dog was tied onto the bumper, and when Phil and Randy drove by, they're dog men. I mean, these guys are real dog men. They saw it. Oh, yeah. No, there ain't no mistaking what that is. They knew what that was. They stopped, turned around, went back. Said, hey, man, where'd you get that dog? They said, oh, he's just a stray dog. He came up here. He goes, would you take $50 from him? He goes, yeah. Mexican sold him for $50. It's a true story. They put him in the truck and went home, gave him some time, rolled him. Oh, he was a good dog. So they matched him. It was 2 hours and 37 minutes. No turn, no out of holds. Both dogs absolutely just of the highest order type of dogs. And
it's your opinion. It's your opinion that dog's ancestry probably goes back.
Old man Ed.
Old man Ed Crenshaw, and your reason for thinking is because he was too high a quality and he was brindle.
The likelihood of a dog being a stray that could go 237 with no turns and no out of holds, there's no way. It had to be, because if you look at the proximity, Ed Crenshaw lived right there outside Albuquerque. He lived right there, and he had, you know, that was back in his day.
And he had brindle dogs.
He had a lot of brindle dogs. Yep. And it turns out that stuff was working really good with Bert's blood. See, because you got Stu Fowler.
Because he already knew that, right? Because
well, see, you got
dog. Well, Stu Fowler was a little later, wasn't he?
No, Stu Fowler was before Short of the Preacher.
Okay.
Stu Fowler was heavily influenced in the Red Jerry blood, which was what Bert was using.
Did you know that Pat Patrick at one time owned Stu Fowler?
Yeah, I
got rid of him, and then he of course regretted it later.
Yeah. He was one of the great ones.
Yeah, he turned out.
Some people believe he was the sire to Boomerang.
Yeah, I've heard that before as well.
Anyway, so they win, but he was so battered up, and Bert, of course, was old timer, and Phil Dibble and Randy were not. They were kind of just getting started. Shorty the Preacher had won the match, but he was going to die.
So what year was Shorty the Preacher found, approximately?
Shorty the Preacher was the daddy to Joe Testament.
That's what I was wondering about.
And so Shorty the Preacher being the daddy to Joe Testament, I got Joe Testament in 79 or 78. So it had to be before that. like late 70s, like 77 or something like that.
Yeah,
Anyway,
sure. Of course,
so
I'm not asking for an exact timeline.
no,
I'm
it's
just curious.
roughly.
Yeah, exactly.
These are all rough dates.
Yeah. Some people like to nitpick over details.
Yeah, I know.
All right. So some of your favorite dogs, obviously Joe Testament. I'm assuming that you were super excited about STP as well. Did you ever see STP?
Oh yeah, sure. He was right there next to Joe Testament.
Yeah.
And of course, it hadn't, when he had won his match, I came out there about the same time. He had just recovered. And Bert had started breeding him, and this is what's interesting about Bert's yard. When he started breeding Shorty the Preacher to all his females, man, his whole yard just blew up.
Asking you about the greats in the yard, one dog that we didn't discuss, of course this was probably 10, 15 years later, Hard Eyes and Bandit. I heard him really speak highly about those.
Those were later.
Yeah.
Those were going on into the
mid-90s or so.
No, late 80s.
Late 80s.
Yep. And he was still in Arizona at the time, but Shoshone was gone, Shorty the Preacher was gone, Johnny Walker was the old dog by then, and those dogs that when I first started with Bert were phasing out, and the younger dogs like
So was Hard Eyes one of the dogs that made it to Florida?
Yeah, he did.
And
he did.
He started in Arizona.
Yeah, he started in Arizona and he made it to Florida. That's right.
Same with Bandit?
Bandit was a young bitch. She was younger.
So she was in Florida for sure.
Yeah, she was in Florida for much longer. Hard Eyes got killed by a lightning strike on an oak tree, and the chain and the tie down was
the anchor
in the ground,
right,
and
grounded.
The oak tree, the roots.
Oh,
it killed him.
I see.
Bert was broken. I'll never forget how bad Bert really. Oh man, that hurt Bert bad.
Bert told me one time that Bandit was his probably best produced bitch because she's the only dog you ever owned that never threw a cur. And
No.
Okay, tell me what about.
Okay, the way it went was.
Well, that's what he told me, but go ahead. You fill me in.
There was a litter. In other words, no dog man has ever produced 100%.
Of course, that's why he was talking about that one female.
Right.
But go ahead.
Bandit produced the only litter of dogs that there was not one cur in the litter.
I got you.
There was not a cur, no curs in the one breeding Hard Eyes and Bandit.
Gotcha.
The whole litter was game, found to be truly a game dogs. No quitters, no curs. He didn't have to shoot or get rid of or cull any of them. That was the thing about Bandit, and she probably was his all-time best, greatest producer. She probably was, yeah. She was a half sister to Joe Testament, you know.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Now, when you say half sister, who did she?
She was sired by Shorty the Preacher.
Okay, Bandit was sired by Shorty the Preacher, and Joe Testament was sired by Shorty the Preacher.
Right.
Very interesting.
Yeah. In my opinion, Joe Testament was probably him, Uncle Bud, and Crazy Horse, the best dogs of the Sorrells line of all time.
I know Bert did not like black dogs, but with Joe Testament and STP both being brindle, I'm surprised you don't see very many brindles. I mean, there's Goober, there's STP, there's Joe Testament.
Well, Shorty the Preacher was not a Sorrells dog now.
Right, but because he bred to so many bitches, I would have thought that there would have been more brindles, but it didn't happen.
There was a few, but they've been bred out.
The brindle dog that I showed you on my phone,
Bert
what was
transitioned.
that dog's name? That I showed you when I got here, the brindle dog, and I asked you who that was. There was two dogs. It was a buckskin dog. You had him in there, and then there was a brindle dog, and then I found on your old Facebook page. You don't even use.
Oh, you're talking about the female?
Yeah.
Two Shoes.
Two Shoes. Was she related to that stuff?
Oh yeah. She had raisin in her.
Okay.
Yep. She had raisin in her, and a dog named Spyro Gyra. I never talk about much, but he wound up being a two-time winner.
If you were to go,
he was sired by Sailor. He was way late. This is going into the 2000s.
Gotcha. What Sailor's existence was in the 90s.
Late 90s.
Late 90s. Okay.
Yep.
And then if you were to look back on the pedigrees today, and you were going to try to, I know you don't do this. You don't breed off a pedigree without looking at dog. You got to look at dog also. But if you were looking at some of your favorite names, which dogs would you build off of if you could have the perfect dog?
Yeah, I would start with Joe Testament. I'd go to Johnny Walker Red, those two, because they were the perfect mix between the Ed Crenshaw Stu Fowler side and the Sorrells Bull, which is the Zeke side. When I met Bert, his best stuff was coming between the Zeke and the Red Jerry blood. The Red Jerry coming from the Stu Fowler and the Corvino. Okay, Ed Crenshaw and Corvino on one side, and then there's Zeke stuff that really comes down out of the Maurice Carver line. Okay, that's Black Widow basically.
Mm-hmm.
So you're talking about Black Widow with the Sorrells Bull mixed with the Ed Crenshaw Corvino blood. So if I was going to build a yard today with the best that I know of, I could build a yard with any one of those I just mentioned. Joe Testament, you could build a yard on him. You could build a yard on easily on Uncle Bud or Crazy Horse. You could build a yard on Johnny Walker Red. You could build a yard on any of those, Sailor, Hard Eyes, all that. But that's later. The earlier stuff, when I first got in it, they had everything. They had talent, they had bite, they had ability, they had gameness. They had all of it, everything you need in one dog. So that's the problem with getting good dogs. I think today is what's happening is the game has changed so much that everybody's breeding for talent and they're overlooking gameness. And it's going to come back to bite them.
I've had a lot of people reach out to me because they know my genetics background, and they ask me to look at the pedigrees, and they want my opinion. I'm like, I can't answer this question because I don't know anything about the dogs that are in this pedigree.
Right.
I mean, you're just throwing me names. All I can see is that you're doubling up on this or tripling up on that. Doesn't really tell. I can't answer your question, unfortunately.
Pedigrees are important.
But the reason why I bring that up is because it seems like one of the problems I've seen today is not only are they breeding for talent, they're also name stacking pedigrees without understanding how or why to do that.
That's right. Well, the two things that you get that I could suggest today that's going wrong is, one, nobody's feeding a family of dogs. When I got started in the late 70s, actually 1974 we got our first one, and then about 76 or 77 we got our second one. So it was mid to late 70s when we started. But everybody that you went to, it didn't matter who you went to. If you went to Pete Sparks in Ocala, Florida, or Jerry Clemens in Huntsville, Texas, or Bert Sorrells in Marana, Arizona, or Maurice Carver in San Antonio, they were all feeding a family of dogs. Some people had two different families, a family of this line and the family of this line.
I did that for
and
a
they
while.
were putting them together. Today, there's just willy-nilly. Get a dog from there, get a dog from over there, get a dog from... The only thing I can say on behalf of that standard, of that way they're doing it, is they're crossing dogs, but they're not crosses anymore, like we were talking about earlier.
Right.
The dogs have been line bred for so long. There's no crosses left.
Right.
Everything's related now.
Right.
Dibo, Colby, Dibo, it's all one family now. Whereas in my day, there was a specific family, like Maurice Carver had Miss Spike and Black Widow and Ironhead, and then Bert had the Zeke and the Red Jerry, and old man James Crenshaw in Georgia there, he was feeding Rascal blood, which was the old Eli blood, the Boudreaux. So everybody had families of dogs. Whereas today, all those dogs of these different families, they're all mixed in now.
Yeah.
Even Chunk, he's got Boudreaux in him, which is a complete kind of an out for what he really is.
Right, because the rest of it's Greenwood, Patrick, Sorrells, and
Maloney.
Maloney, yep.
Sorrells, Patrick, Maloney, and Ralph Greenwood.
Yeah.
But there's some Boudreaux. There's an eighth of Boudreaux in there.
Right, I remember that.
Yeah, there's an eighth of Boudreaux in him,
yeah.
Which is fine. It's good, but it's not as much of a cross now as it would have been in the early 80s.
Right.
In the early 80s, that would have been a full cross, and you probably wouldn't want to do it. Nowadays, these young guys are doing it, and I'm going, you know what? It's probably not a bad idea to do it because they're so tight.
Right.
They're
I noticed a
fucking
lot of people, I have heard that Bert Sorrells, which you can speak on this if you wanted to, I heard that Joni went Sorrells and Carver, and that Bert went Sorrells and Red Boy, and I wasn't sure exactly to the truth of that, but because of my objectives, since I'm breeding the band dogs, I wanted some larger dogs, and so I was focusing on Bert Sorrells' dog Pokey.
Dogs were getting bigger.
They were getting bigger, and he had that dog Pokey.
As I left Bert, his dogs were already. Sailor was instrumental, and then Roadblock.
Roadblock, I heard, was huge.
Huge dog.
Yeah.
And he was the last living dog sired by Bull. It was the last big dog sired by Bull, and he was an inbred son of Bull. He was a father-daughter by Bull.
Yeah.
So he used, and that produced a lot of big dogs with Sorrells line.
Yeah, and I took that, a lot of Pokey blood, and I was looking, you know, should I go to the Red Boy like Bert did, copy his plan, and I was like, you know what, I'm not, because Patrick blood is similar to Bert Sorrells' blood, and Mayday is Red Boy Patrick already put together. So instead of just going Sorrells Red Boy, I did Sorrells Mayday, which is Red Boy and Patrick, which is the same family of dogs.
Yeah. They're not, I mean,
similar, yeah.
10 years ago, I was trying to convince these young guys, hey, but now I'm not. I'm not trying to convince anybody that you need to stay with your family. No, you don't, because they're too tight. You need it. If you can find an out, go ahead and do it, because there's no outs no more.
Well, one of the things I do,
there's no outs.
Of course, we all have our own things, but one of the things I do is I don't worry about going for an out unless there are one or two things that happen. One, I see a trait that I need to improve, or two, the litter size or heat cycles are going down.
Right.
When I see something like that occur, then I'll try to do
Tight.
that. I'll do it.
Like these over here on the side.
Yeah.
Minnie the Moocher. We've
Yeah.
never had a litter out of her. She's already 4,
Yeah.
almost 4. It's because she's tight bred.
Mm-hmm.
She's very tight.
Yeah. Are you catching her in her heat cycle?
Her heat cycles are real weird.
You know,
They last for like 6 days and they're out. She swells up, bleeds, and then reduces.
I'm going to get something for you. It's some tests that you can do that you can actually check on the LH or the ovulation, so that way you don't have to guess with the old counting the days or looking at the blood. You can actually check
looking
the
at her,
hormone.
looking at her coochie thing.
Yeah.
Because it would swell up and bleed, and then as soon as it stopped bleeding, it just go right
Some
back
of them are
down.
tricky.
It's like they went out.
Yeah.
She looks like she's going out.
Yeah, you told me you had one that went out, and then 2 months later she came back in again.
Well, yeah, that was Pinto Bean.
Yeah.
She was a fine little bit.